In this video, we will be talking about disclosures which fit into due diligence or investigative period of real estate transaction. In specific, we will be examining the Transfer Disclosure Statement, TDS, the Seller Property Questionnaire, SPQ, and the Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure, AVID. There are numerous disclosures involved in any residential transaction that need to be provided to the buyer in a timely manner. Some are required under Residential Purchase Agreement, RPA. Some are required by law, while others are obtained as good practice. In paragraph 10 of the RPA, it states the obligation of the seller to provide certain disclosures. Among those disclosures are the TDS, the SPQ, but also the AVID and the Natural Hazard Disclosure, NHD. And then there are even more, just to name a few, such as the Federal Lead Paint Disclosure, Asbestos Disclosure, Mellow Roofs Disclosure, and Megan's Law Notice. Some disclosures can be found in form of pre-printed booklets through third-party resources like Disclosure Source or Property ID. Those simply need signatures by the seller, buyer, listing agent, and selling agent. Those are the Residential Environmental Hazard, Protect Your Family from Lead, Homeowner's Guide to Earthquake Safety, Consumer Information Acknowledgement, and Home Energy Rating System, HERS. However, the more important disclosures are the TDS and the SPQ because they specifically relate to the property's condition, and if done incorrectly by the seller, may form the basis of future lawsuit for non-disclosure. Let's begin with the TDS, which is the first and most important disclosure because it is a statutory requirement. It is a 3-page form. On the top of the TDS, you will need to fill in the property address and the date the form is being completed. The seller needs to mark whether they have any other disclosures and reports to provide to the buyer. Then the seller needs to mark whether they are occupying the property or not, and then check mark any items that transfer with the property to the buyer. Occupying, what transfers, such as the range, oven, dishwasher, and so on. Other items they need to mention in this part are the type of roof and its age, and answer questions whether they are aware if any of these items marked are not in operating condition. If the answer is yes, they need to provide an explanation. The purpose of the TDS is to identify for the buyer significant defects, malfunctions of structural components of the property, such as walls, roofs, windows, foundation. The TDS requires the seller to identify any known defects, which is on the second page of the TDS. Again, if the seller is aware of any significant defects or malfunctions, they need to give an explanation of these items. The last portion of the TDS is a 16 series question that the seller is required to answer, which are related to any known defects of the property. The two places where the seller routinely end up in hot water are on question 4 and 5. These require the seller to disclose where any altercations have been completed without a permit or whether any altercations are not in compliance with building codes. For example, not getting a permit is a violation of the building code. Most people are not even aware of what things need to be permitted. For example, in any jurisdiction, you are required to get a permit to alter or improve any electrical, plumbing, or heating within the home. Many common projects that are routinely completed require a permit to be obtained. Answering this question incorrectly could expose the seller to a lawsuit. Question 12, 13, and 14 refer to CC&Rs and HOAs, and if the property is within an HOA, these need to be marked yes. Again, if any questions are marked yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. If the room provided on the TDS is not sufficient for the seller, they can attach an additional sheet for the explanation portion. The last page requires signatures of all parties and also refers to the AVID. If you have already completed your AVID, you're going to check mark the first box. If not, you can check mark the last box and type in AVID to follow. It is important that the seller carefully reviews and answers the questions accurately to the best of their ability, and if necessary, take responsible steps to investigate the issue prior to answering. Ultimately, what often comes up is the person making the disclosure did not think they were required to disclose. This can be dangerous, so the best way to approach the problem is, if you have to ask the question, do I need to disclose the issue? You should disclose, disclose, disclose. Now we're going to take a look at the SPQ. This 4-page form is more detailed disclosure regarding the seller to specifically answer questions related to the property in 13 distinct parts. The purpose of it is to provide the buyer with a more comprehensive look at the condition of the property, especially those items which are hidden by the buyer. The law is clear that the seller is to have the duty to disclose all known material defects of the property, and the SPQ gives that opportunity. On the top of the form, you will fill in the property address and the APN number, which you can find on the property profile. The first part is made up of 11 questions. These questions are statutory or contractually required. For example, whether the seller is aware of a death on the property within the last 3 years, illegal or controlled substances on or beneath the property being on or near an industrial zone, any insurance claims in the last 5 years, any material defects otherwise not disclosed. If any of the 11 questions were answered yes, then the seller needs to give an explanation. The next part is a series of 5 questions on repairs and altercations. Whether the seller is aware of altercations or remodeling done to the property. Whether there is any ongoing maintenance, think monthly pest control. The property was painted in the last 12 months, or it was built on or before 1978. If any of these questions were answered yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. The next part are 3 questions on structural systems and appliances, such as whether the seller is aware of any defects in items such as electrical, drainage, and foundation. And this includes any past defects that were already repaired, whether there are any leased systems. If any questions were answered yes, the seller then needs to give an explanation. The next part is 1 question on relief disaster. Insurance or civil settlements were sought or received. If yes, the seller gives an explanation here. The next part are 3 questions on water and mold related issues and whether the seller is aware of any water intrusion, mold, or floods in the neighborhood affecting the property. If any questions were answered yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. The next portion asks about pets and pests and whether the seller had any or is aware of any. If any questions were answered yes, the seller then gives an explanation. The next part asks questions on boundaries, access, and property use, and whether seller is aware of any boundaries and easement disputes. If any, with or without permission, is using part or all of the property. If any questions were answered yes, the seller will give an explanation. The next part asks about landscaping, pool, and spa, and whether the seller is aware of any infestation on or near the property. Sprinklers, heaters on pool and spa, and whether there are any past or present defects with any of the equipment. If any of these questions were answered yes, the seller then gives an explanation. The next part is marked if applicable because it asks questions on condominiums and common interest developments. If the property is a single-family residence with no HOA and no CC&Rs, then the seller skips over this part. Otherwise, they need to answer the question whether they are aware of any proposed due increases, architectural committee, and they made any alterations without their approval. If any questions were answered yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. The next portion consists of 6 questions on title, ownership lien, and legal claims, and whether the seller is aware of any lawsuit, mechanic liens, and has any PACE liens like the HERO program. If any questions were answered yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. The next part asks 1 question on neighborhood and whether seller is aware of any noise issues, nuisances, construction, etc. If yes, then the seller needs to give an explanation. The second to last part are 9 questions on governmental issues, whether the seller is aware of any eminent domain, rent control, special assessments, or penalties imposed. If any questions were answered yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. The last part is labeled Others, consisting of 3 questions whether any occupant smoked in the property, and then the catch-all question whether the seller has any reports, disclosures, inspections, whether oral and/or written, and whether or not the seller received them. Lastly, whether the seller is aware of any past or present known material facts or significant items affect the value or desirability of the property, otherwise not disclosed. If any questions were answered yes, the seller needs to give an explanation. If the seller runs out of room for explanation, they can simply attach additional sheet. The SPQ gets signed by the buyer and the seller. As you can see, the SPQ requires the seller to carefully consider and answer the questions thoroughly. The seller should take the time to review the questions and provide the information sought. Many sellers try to complete this task once under contract. However, given the nature of the document, it is probably better for the seller to sit with the listing agent and complete this document prior to listing the property to be certain they are fully completed documents. Now let's take a look at the AVID. This is a 3-page form that requires to be completed by both the listing agent and the selling agent per RPA and statute because an agent owes a duty to a prospective purchaser of a residential property to conduct a diligent inspection and owes the duty to disclose all information materially affecting the value or desirability of the property. There is a difference, however, between investigation and visual inspection. The law confers on the agent the obligation to disclose problems that can be seen or discovered in a visual inspection. The AVID does not require the agent to take the place of a professional inspector and conduct exhaustive investigation of the property. The requirement of the agent is to complete a diligent visual inspection. This means disclosing what is readily visible and only which is visible. You identify the defects, but not to stipulate on the cause because as agent, you do not know the cause, and to speculate on cause exposes the agent to liability if the cause is ultimately proved to be inaccurate. For example, you see a crack in the driveway. Correct way to state crack in driveway. Incorrect is to state as crack in the driveway caused by roots from neighbor's tree. So on top of the first page, you state the property's address and the brokerage performing the visual inspection. Then you go room by room to identify visual defects. On the second page, you're going to state the date, time, weather conditions, and if anyone else was present during the inspection. While going room by room to identify visual defects, take comprehensive notes on your inspection, complete the AVID properly after the inspection, or better yet, take the AVID with you and complete it as you complete your visual inspection. Remember, the agent cannot abdicate their responsibility to complete this inspection to anyone or by simply advising that a professional home inspection is completed. So be sure to take the time to complete the AVID correctly.